God can't breathe. A 12-year-old black boy with an air gun lies dead in a park in Cleveland, shot dead in 2 seconds by police. God can't breathe. The world mourns 17 people killed by extremists in Paris and ignores over 2,000 killed the same week in Nigeria. God can't breathe. A broken and corrupted grand jury system results in white police officers being acquitted of murdering unarmed black men in Ferguson and Staten Island. God can't breathe. 89 fires set in Columbus after the Ohio State National Football Championship victory are considered merely rowdy reveling by the primarily white crowds. A few fires set in Ferguson bring National Guard tanks. God can't breathe. Dressed up like a samurai, complete with fake sword, black-skinned Darian Hunt runs for his life in Saratoga Springs, Utah, as white police shoot him in the back 6 times. No charges brought. God can't breathe. Perhaps more than any other year since Martin Luther King Jr. became a national holiday in 1986, I can't breathe. I'm overwhelmed with the reality of our nation heaving through another spasm of growth in our understanding about race. There seems to be a relentless stream of news that continues to raise our awareness about the disparity between the experience of blacks in America and the experience of whites in America. We are not a post-racial America by any means. We are still struggling with the ugly legacy of over 500 years of creating race distinctions in the name of land-grabbing profit in European Christian righteousness, starting with the running over of the native peoples of this continent, moving on to the enslavement of millions of Africans, and then the exploitation of Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, and Mexican workers, and it goes on and on. We should not be surprised that such a legacy of violence and inhumanity should take many, many generations to fully address. Such human suffering on such a grand scale, right here in our own freedom-loving country. And so, this MLK Day finds me in an agitated state. You probably picked that up already. I'm barely able to breathe. It seems like every week there's a new revelation about racism in our country. And some of it feels pretty personal. I remind you that my life partner is the Reverend Myron Andes, who serves as the settled minister at the Minnesota Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Bloomington, Minnesota. Yep, that's right, Bloomington, the home of the famous or infamous Mall of America. Yeah, which I found out has more visitors than Disneyland and Disney World. Go figure. And so, here he is in Bloomington. Myron was one of a large group of interfaith clergy who helped organize the rally at Mall of America in support of Black Lives Matter just before Christmas. I have been stunned at his stories about how it's come to light that the police infiltrated the planning sessions, tapped the cell phones and emails of folks, prevented some of the African American organizers from even entering the mall. And these people weren't even with signs or anything, they were just walking into the mall. And they turned the entire mall into a militarized zone, being out in force in full riot gear. And this is all happening even as regular shoppers and retail workers stopped to join the prodigious crowd of people of all ages, many with their children, in support of this peaceful event that simply said, Black Lives Matter. Myron testified at a recent hearing at the Bloomington City Hall where citizens expressed their overwhelming support for the rally. And even with this public support, the Bloomington powers that be have charged, get this, 10 young African American organizers. In spite of the fact that the protest was clearly a broad-based coalition of many people of many colors. Myron and many of our other Unitarian Universalist ministers have signed a letter to the Bloomington folks saying, charge me too, lifting up the racial profiling and the right of peaceful witness by citizens. Now, I haven't gotten any calls from Myron at the Bloomington jail yet, but I'm going to be interested to see where all this lands before it's all said and done. He's been in the paper a lot there. For it seems to me that these unfoldings are the Selmas of our time. When Dr. King wrote his letter from the Birmingham jail in 1963, he was clearly disgusted with the passive inaction of white moderates playing it safe while black lives were being snuffed out every day. The words from that 7,000-word letter that Dan spoke speak for themselves. It was a call to action that unfortunately sounds a bit too familiar 52 years later. Those who feel uncomfortable with public demonstrations, those who just want peace, quiet, and gradual bit-by-bit change, those who believe we don't have racism in our country, are more complicit than you might think in every death, in every act of racial violence, in every time that black and brown lives are destroyed by systemic racism. While many celebrate King's holiday with community action projects and prayer breakfasts, all well-intended and good, seriously, these are safe activities that do not fully honor his legacy. King was a radical in the same sense that Jesus was a radical. I believe the radical energy of Dr. King is being reawakened in this nation, jolted into reality by the events of the last few months. Now, how many of you have been to see the new movie Selma? Yeah. Well, for those who haven't yet, I highly commend going. You can see it here in Ogden right now at either the Junction or Newgate Mall. When you go to that movie, what you're going to see is a radical MLK. An MLK pushed to his limits about voting rights and moving powerfully to create a notable civil disobedience act by marching thousands of people from Selma to Montgomery, the state capital, to confront people in power over the disenfranchisement and disempowerment of blacks. This happened in March 1965. This was not the I have a dream kumbaya MLK, but the anguished and courageous Martin Luther King, who knew that he was most likely putting people in harm's way, even with the peaceful civil disobedience, these nonviolent demonstrations that they were doing in the face of certain retaliations by racist police, politicians, and white bigots. Over the course of the action, King calls in reinforcements and puts out a national clergy call via telephone and telegram. Just imagine what you can do now because with the internet. But with the phone and with telegrams. Within a couple of days, thousands converged on Selma, including 179 Unitarian Universalist ministers and seminarians. Notably among them was James Reed, a Unitarian Universalist minister from Boston who was killed in Selma, a martyr for the civil rights movement and our faith. You're going to hear more about this inspiring and dramatic story on Selma Sunday, March 8th, when we will honor the 50th anniversary of the Selma marches. But this radical MLK spoke to the hearts of our forebears to the extent that once they saw what they saw on television, with people, innocent people being beaten, the violence was incredible. They dropped everything they were doing. They put their lives on hold and put their own bodies on the line on the Pettus Bridge in Selma in deep, faithful solidarity. That spirit of the radical king is rekindling the Black Lives Matter movement. That's the reason we marched, about 20 or so of us marched with the New Zion Baptist Church to pray on the steps of City Hall after the Ferguson verdict. That's the reason Myron joined thousands at Mall of America. That's the reason where so many people of all colors in so many communities are publicly proclaiming Black Lives Matter. We can't go back to sleep, folks. We just can't. The truth is that violence against people of color and systemic racism have continued since Selma in a myriad ways. Black and brown people know this every day, but the vast majority of white people don't see it at all. Racism may be more subtle now. Not the obvious Bull Connor setting dogs on demonstrators, or hooded Klansmen burning crosses on people's front yards, or Jim Crow segregated restaurants. But now it lives in coded language, with people expressing concerns about things like crime and property values and schools. Even this past week, we heard from some North Ogden citizens that they oppose an extension of Monroe Boulevard into their neighborhood because it might bring crime and other problems to their doorsteps. Really? Coded language. And when we say things like, and this is something so many white liberals say, I don't see color, I just see humans. We're deluding ourselves when we talk that way. We all see color. And to claim color blindness in our lives is a form of blindness in itself. For color does matter when how one grows up, how one is treated, and what prospects one has for a fulfilling life in this country. It's arrogant and ignorant for those of us who identify as white to proclaim colorblindness when the evidence surrounds us, that Black lives are in danger every day, from the misguided snap judgments, from bias, from fear, from acknowledged and unacknowledged racism. God can't breathe. Now, when I say God can't breathe, what I really mean is, we can't breathe. For in my estimation, we're all sparks of the divine. We're all part of the grand creation. My God is not an all-powerful Heavenly Father. My God is seen all around us. We, each and every one of us, collectively, co-create the divine every moment of our lives. We are all divine siblings in a very large family, each a precious part of a completely mysterious whole. And so when Eric Garner utters his last words in a chokehold on the New York City sidewalk and says, I can't breathe, then I can't breathe either. And neither can you, for the poison of racism in this country is breathed in by all of us just as surely as we all breathe in the brown air here in Ogden in the winter. Yes, that is the truth of the matter. And so, what are we going to do about it? Because, you know, tackling racism can feel pretty hopeless. And yet, I take heart that 200 years ago, people felt that slavery was inevitable and unfixable, just the way things are in the world. And yet we all know that the radical courage of the abolitionists who stood up for human rights won the day, eventually. I'd like to think that each and every one of us will do our part in our time to move to the place where Dr. King described in his I Have a Dream speech. We do it by not turning the other way from the news, but by paying attention, calling out racism when we see it. We do it by being willing to connect with our neighbors of color right here in this neighborhood, learning of their struggles and how we may serve them and their cause. We do it by sitting down with our African American and Hispanic communities here in Ogden and humbly listening to their lived experiences. We do it by committing to learn more about white privilege and all those kinds of things that feel so uncomfortable, and how we unconsciously perpetuate racism even when we're well-intended, good, liberal white people. We do it by showing up when we're asked to stand witness, like our Minnesota and other Unitarian Universalist fellow travelers across the country. And we do it for the long haul, not just once in a while, one day here, one day there. We do it by committing ourselves to breathe. I didn't say to be calm, said the wind. I said to breathe. We're going to need a lot of air to make this hurricane together. In the name of Dr. King and all who stood with him, may it be so.